let's talk about what actually controls the things that regulate infiltration capacity. So what controls these things like the initial rate, the equilibrium rate? Well, the first major thing is the properties of the soil itself. And by soil properties, we're talking things like the porosity. So we already talked about this, the magnitude, the space in between the solids. Permeability. This is sort of a metric of the ability to transmit fluids. Things like the soil structure at large, whether or not, for example, there are big roots or burrows from animals or some sort of fractures that may form as the soil is drying. All of these things we can kind of lump into this term macropores. But I want to really stress that the porosity and permeability are closely related to the grain size distribution. So this is describing the relative sizes of particles in a particular structure. And I think you can probably intuit that, if there's big grains like in a gravel, there's lots of space to flow between. If you have a diversity of grain sizes, the smaller sizes can get packed in between the bigger ones, and that can decrease both the porosity and the permeability. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about how we measure and describe grain size distributions. I first want to note, though, that if you were to look at a big particle of sand, say this is about 1 millimeter across. So this is a coarse sand. There is a huge range of sizes. So inside here you might have another sand size grain. I could then draw something like a fine sand. And then in here, about 1/100th the size of the coarse one, I could have silt. And then this tiny little dot here is going to represent a clay particle, like 1,000th the actual size of a coarse sand. So there's really big differences in these. And in the next video, we'll talk about ways to quantify the relative abundance within a particular soil.